What is data journalism? First part. In this section, we will discuss what is data journalism, or what is also known as precision journalism. Look at this picture. This was created a while back in 1858 by the British nurse Florence Nightingale. It is a report on the conditions of British soldiers during the Crimean War, where the main causes of death are analysed. It is one of the first examples of a pie chart, which was then also published by some press outlets. Look at this other image. It is a page of the first edition of the British newspaper, The Guardian, in 1821, where data was published listing the schools in Manchester, along with the registration costs and the number of students. From 1821 till today, the change has been the data visualization and representation, even where the information remains the same. So much so that Simon Rogers, who was then in charge of the data section of The Guardian, took that information and that article from the Guardian edition of 1821, which can be defined as an example of data journalism before the term was coined. He reworked it into an image using simple devices and provided the same information of 1821. This is to show that data journalism is not a new concept. In fact, we can say that it has existed for as long as data has existed. The difference is that while in the past data was published in very expensive books or was reported in diagrams and tables that were not easy to understand, nowadays the computer, with spreadsheets and specific tools, does half of the work, and above all, it is able to make information much simpler and easier to read. Data journalism is journalism that was created out of analysing data, with the aim of extracting information and telling, even through the use of new technologies, the stories behind it. The subject of investigative journalism can be any kind of data on topics that are economically and socially relevant, provided the analysis makes it possible to extract information of public interest. The starting point for a data journalist is obviously the data. From that, we start looking for an analysis that makes this data meaningful and that can add useful information to the topic being discussed. Usually, the precision journalist approaches the data as a journalist and not as an analyst, even if his work is a bit of a cross between the analyst, the journalist, and the researcher. But what data are we talking about? The data that is possibly useful for the research work you are conducting is the data you are already analysing at your job. This data relates to economic and social issues. It must always be obtained from reliable sources. It must be reusable, meaning it can be published with a license, and it must be able to be aggregated so as to build new indicators and new data sets by putting together multiple sources. The necessary tools are those that you have already heard about in previous sections and in previous lessons. They are obviously the spreadsheets, which allow you to analyse small or large tables. And the most important thing in data journalism is knowing how to create graphic visualizations, infographics, maps, and interactive graphs of various types from the data to tell the story in the most effective way possible. Data visualization is actually an extremely important aspect of data journalism, and it is advisable to learn to use the visualization tools among those that are available online for free. Let us now look at some examples of productions and investigations from data journalism. A data journalist can analyse a social phenomenon in territorial areas with the aim of comparing, for example, different geographical areas in relation to a given phenomenon. For example, the Italian investigation into property confiscated from the mafia was a data journalism investigation, which then became something else, as other various types of entities also participated. This was an investigation to map and monitor the progress of Italy's confiscation of assets from organised crime. Not only were journalists participant in designing and implementing the project, but also activists and experts of different fields. Each of them provided their expertise to answer various questions on the management of confiscated assets. The results of this analysis therefore allow us to understand whether this is a phenomenon that has a greater impact on one area more than another. In cases of investigative journalism that are similar to this one, you may start from the differences between areas to try to analyse new data, to understand if there is a correlation with other phenomena, and also to understand the recurrence of an event, to seek a better understanding of its development. For example, there was an accident on a specific section of a road, and the question that can be asked is whether this was the first time that this has happened, or is that stretch of road often affected by similar events? Another example is the case of a flood that caused significant damage. Did it have a greater intensity than similar disasters, or is it a territorial and urban problem of hydrogeological instability? Another illustration of analysis of data regarding the development of a given phenomenon over time and to the in-depth analysis of that phenomenon to offer an understanding of precisely what were the elements that have changed this phenomenon over time is another investigation carried out on the impact of vaccines and infectious diseases in the 20th century. And here is the result of this investigative journalism carried out by the Wall Street Journal and which won the Data Journalism Award 2015 as Best Data Visualization. This is a set of interactive heat maps that show the number of infected people measured over 80 years in all US states. Many data journalism investigations, especially those related to issues of transparency, exist in a system of organized information exchange, as we have seen in the case of the investigation into assets confiscated from the mafia. Not only journalists, but also other players, researchers, sociologists, experts, or even simply laypersons who are passionate about the topic or are directly interested in the subject, can contribute to the collection and analysis of data. We can therefore say that in some cases, data journalism can also be a type of civic and participatory journalism. An example of civic and participatory journalism that comes from overseas is the Nation Initiative, named after a prestigious Argentinian newspaper, which, in collaboration with other entities, has given life to the Voz Data project, an online platform that combines civic monitoring with investigative journalism on administrative transparency.